It gives me an immense pleasure to extend you a very warm welcome on behalf of the Jagran Lake City University. My name is Priyanka Nema, and I feel privileged to welcome the August gathering on behalf of my university. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward no matter how challenging the situation is. Beautiful lines and said by Sir Martin Luther King, clearly and directly could be related to the importance of today's event. We at JLU believes in the philosophy that learning should never be stopped, no matter what. JLU and Jagran Lake City Business School brings the Ignited Mind lecture series, and I would like to thank Dean, Faculty of Management and Commerce, Dr. Nilesh Khare. Sir, thank you, sir, for inviting speakers for the lecture series. Now, please welcome today's guest speaker, Dr. Vishal K. Gupta.
I will first start by kind of, making sure that I pay my respects to two outstanding leaders. Before I start, I think it's important to make a disclaimer. Dr. Khare and I have been friends for a long time, but anything I say here is just my views. It has nothing to do with Dr. Khare or JLU or my institution here or anyone else. This is just my views. So if you disagree, that's fine. Feel free to disagree during the presentation. If you agree, that's good too, but it is all just my views. So three things inform my thinking, and I think that's important to understand what those three things are, because they are going to shape the rest of the talk today. First is leaders become, they are not born. As you may remember, Dr. Naga, who did the previous lecture on leadership, also talked about this, that leadership skills, leaders become. And yet I'm surprised by how many people continue to think that leaders are born, which is the biggest mistake one can make. So leaders become, they are not born. Leadership can be learned. So that's very important. If you want to be a good leader, you can learn those leadership skills. But as with everything else, theoretical learnings need to be complemented with practical experience. So theoretical learning in itself is not the end all be all. You need to complement the theoretical learning with some practical experience. I think it's important for us to understand that just like, if you were building a house, if you were doing heart surgery, if you were, doing anything else, right, you would ideally want someone with both the knowledge of theory and practice. Same with leadership. Practice complements the theory. And third, and this I think is very important for us to understand, there is no perfect leader in the world. Okay, a lot of people who study like morals and ethics, they found that one of the interesting traits about Indian culture is that people are searching for perfection. And I think when it comes to leadership, we have to accept that there is no perfect leader in the world. Never has been, never will be. Okay. Now, the difference between most leaders and those who become great is that great leaders try to continue to improve. They recognize their shortcomings and then they try to improve those shortcomings. Those are great leaders, very few. Most leaders do not. Okay, so think about someone like Nelson Mandela, right? Nelson Mandela at some point realized that there were some problems in the way he was leading in the South African freedom struggle. And when he recognized those problems, he fixed them and he completely changed into the person most of us know him to be. So most leaders do not, but great leaders try to continue improving. And I think those are three important things that inform my thinking about leadership. So with that, I'll move on. The roadmap for today's presentation will be, first I'll give you a background of how did this project come to be. The presentation you'll see today is part of like a bigger project. And I think it's important for me to give you the background. In the background, I'll also talk to you more about the 6 leaders that you saw on that flyer that Dr. Khare, Dr. Nema, and JLU shared with you. Then we'll talk about what can we learn from these game changers. I'll tell you what I learned from these game changers, okay? And that's kind of my message to you in terms of leadership. Then I'll talk to you about what you as a young student can do going forward, right? Sometimes we talk about leadership, but the things we talk about, if you're 21 or 22 or 23 years old, sometimes those things seem too far away. So I'm going to talk to you about what you can do as a young student based on what I have learned from these leaders. And then in the end, I'll ask you, what did you find most useful? What will you do different going forward in your view? Not in terms of my recommendation, but in terms of what you are going to do. And going forward, I mean today or tomorrow. I don't mean like, way in the future. Background story. So the background story, so if you think about this project is that there are leaders and game changers in India that we can learn from. Okay, so that's kind of the thesis of my talk, and that's why I'm doing this presentation for you. The story actually starts about 20 years ago when I was a master's student. Some of you I know are master's students. In 2001, I was a master's student at Penn State, and I was really new from India to the US at that time. And I attended a campus talk one evening by the founder of Teach for America. Teach for America is a group in the US, and the founder is a lady called Wendy Kopp. I'll talk with you more about her. She's Wendy Kopp. 20 years ago, of course, she was younger. And I attended a talk that she did on campus. And that talk changed my whole worldview in terms of how I thought about things, okay? So what were the three things that happened that evening that changed the way I thought about things? First thing that happened was the talk was in the evening, okay? The talk was in the evening, and in the evening, students, faculty, staff, and community members came to the talk without anyone forcing them to come. They came to the talk to listen to Wendy's story. Think about that. Okay, now I was not new to talks like this. I went to a school, a high school, middle school in India. I went to a school where we had people like Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Yasser Arafat come to the school, and they would talk about things. Okay, so I was not new to listening to people. In my college days, when I did my engineering, we were inviting guest speakers to college. I was the president of Mechanical Engineering Students Association, and we invited some people to talk to students all the time, okay? I was not new to talks, but what I was new to was the following. Nobody told these students, staff, or community members that they have to go to the talk. They got an email or saw a flyer, and they came voluntarily to the talk, first. Second, every time I'd been in a talk before that, even Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela, okay, even Nelson Mandela, people like Nelson Mandela and Yasser Arafat, what I found was that the talk itself was not the main show. The talk was a sideshow. To what? To some cultural event. Or in college, I found that talks were a sideshow for free food. Okay, here I was in a room listening to the speaker, surrounded by people for all of who were there because the talk was the main show. So first, these people came to listen to Wendy share her story, something that I'd never seen before. Now, I'm happy to elaborate on this, but I'm not the only one who says this. One of the famous alumni, if you will, of Bhopal, or a famous citizen of Bhopal is Javed Akhtar. And he's made that point about India too, in some of his talks, that listening to successful people share their story is rarely the main event main part of the event. Second, I saw this really interesting thing that many attendees with me I was not one of them. Remember, this was my first talk in the US, right? First talk that I was listening to. Many of the other attendees were taking notes. They actually had paper and pen and they were writing. At the end of the talk, they were asking probing questions to Miss Kopp, to Wendy. They were asking her questions about things that she had mentioned in her story. Those questions were meant to know more about what she had said. They were not hostile questions. They were not confrontational questions. The question was about tell us more. I'd never seen this before. Okay. And I was very impressed when I saw that. And the third thing I saw that impressed me a lot was that the next day, the campus newspaper gave prominent coverage to her talk on the front page. Okay. So that I was very impressed by. Why? I'm now a professor in the US, right? I've been teaching for a long time. And over the years, I have learned that one of the big problems on American campuses is alcohol, is sexual assault, is rape, is molestation. That's not what came on the campus newspaper front page. The campus newspaper front page was about the inspiring speech, talk of Wendy Kopp, was about what the audience felt listening to her talk. When those three things happened, it challenged me in a way that I had never thought I would be challenged before I went into that talk. Over the next few years, as I lived in the US, I had a chance to hear many successful people. Warren Buffett, Bob Woodward. I don't know how many of you know Bob Woodward, but he's one of the most, and I'm sure you know Warren Buffett, right? In India, people know him as the second richest man in the world, and I'll come to the rich part in a few minutes. But it's not just the second richest man in the world thing that he's famous for in the US. He's famous for being a successful investor, a nice human being, an inspiring business icon. I heard Bob Woodward, who's a very, very famous journalist in the US, and in his talk, and I noticed this a few days before too when he was on TV, he talks about his mentor, something I'd never seen in India, where successful people are talking and they're talking about people who inspired them. So, that's impressive. Joe Paterno, he's a famous American coach. And we, the list is endless. Over the last 19 years, I must have heard hundreds of leaders. And I started thinking that perhaps maybe that is the fundamental difference between India and the US. That is what differentiates India from the US. Not that we don't have leaders like Wendy Kopp or Warren Buffett or Bob Woodward or Joe Paterno. We do. But we in India don't usually care about what they have to say. It is ironic. It is sad. And it's not just me who's commenting that. Even someone like Amitabh Bachchan, who you'll hear about in a few minutes, even he's commented on that somehow that's what the audience wants to see. Okay. The only place I've seen something different where some of the things I'd seen in Penn State happen in India was in Doon School. I happened to be on a visit there, and Ashwin Sanghi, who's one of the popular fiction writers in India, was visiting Doon School, and students were collected in the evening, listening to him, taking notes, asking probing questions. But I rarely see this on any other campuses. I doubt you would even find that on many of the premier engineering and management colleges in India. Fast forward a few years, I became a professor. I decided in 2010, I got an opportunity to bring American students to India. And when I started thinking about what I'm going to do with these students in India, I asked around. Okay, I asked around, and I also remember I talked to Dr. Naga and I talked to a bunch of people. And I found that the dominant model for Indian programs, dominant, I'm not saying everywhere, was poverty tourism or service project. Americans visited India, they looked at poor people, and they did some project like to help slum people or whatever, right? Now, having lived for so many years in the US and having been impressed by this model that I saw of Wendy Kopp and Bob Woodward and Warren Buffett, I asked myself, when Indians visit America, do they come to see poor people? I don't think so. I never met an Indian who said, I'm going to America to see poor people. And yet, having lived in America for so long, I know there's plenty of poor people here. So if Indians are not coming to America to see poor people, why should poor people be the focus of Americans traveling to India? I said, no. If I like leadership, I am going to make the focus be on leaders, Indian leaders. Now, the question was, what kind of Indian leaders? Okay. And I thought, who are the kind of Indian leaders in the US that impressed me? They were not the politicians or head of states. They were everyday people who were doing phenomenal things. Wendy Kopp, Bob Woodward. And I thought that's the kind of leaders we are going to meet in India. And of course, I decided that we are going to make the trip fun. So not a sulking trip about poor people, but a fun trip about, meeting Indian leaders. And that's the leaders that you are going to meet today. Now, here's the interesting thing I found. Many of those leaders were very surprised that we wanted to hear from them. Can you believe that? Here are these successful leaders who've, done a lot in their sphere of things. But when we reached out to them, they were very surprised that we wanted to meet them. In fact, at one of those leaders' place that you will hear about in a few minutes, KPS Gill, one of my students who you see in this picture was so impressed by the speech, by the talk, that he said, I have a question. Given your experience and given the things you shared with us, I bet that young people are lining up to hear from you. Young people who are coming into this area, into this profession, must be lining up to hear from you all the time. And I was very impressed, surprised, sad that our speaker, KPS Gill, said, sadly, no. He said, the sad truth is that young people coming into this profession rarely come to listen to me. When I shared this with some people, when I shared this with people who've been friends of mine since college, I shared with them that this is the interaction that happened. One of them raised a very important issue. He said, when KPS Gill was young, did he care about listening to more successful people at the time? And that, to me, points to an error in our system. If we don't listen to successful people, guess what? Every time we try to be successful, we are recreating the wheel. All that knowledge and experience they've gained is lost for the next generation. Now, that is not how things are done in the US. That is not how things are done in Japan. That is not how things are done in countries that we want to emulate. Okay? So who are the leaders we met? We met Vineet Nair, former CEO of HCL. Vineet Nair came up with a really interesting philosophy, employee first, customer second. That's a transformative way of thinking about how businesses and management should be. Those of you who are professors on this call, those of you who are faculty members watching this, imagine being at a university where the university administration said, professors first, students second. Can you imagine that? The idea that employees come first got him so much attention that there were Harvard Business School cases written about him. He wrote a book that sold very well. He was invited to come talk at World Economic Forum about employee first, customer second. And he's considered among the world's top business thinkers. He, in deference, in accordance to his policy of employee first, customer second, he instituted 360-degree feedback throughout the firm. Now, 360-degree feedback, for those of you who do not know, means that everyone around you, your boss, your subordinate, your laterals, get to give feedback on what they think about you. Here's the interesting part. Very few companies do that, and rare is the company where the CEO is also part of the 360-degree feedback. Can you believe that? But if employees come first, then of course they need to have a say in how they are being managed, and that's what Vineet Nair did. So one year we went to listen to him to talk. We went to listen to Kiran Bedi. Now she's the Lieutenant Governor of Pondicherry, but back then she was not. This is our group in her office, in her basement. And as you know, she's the first female. She's the first female IPS officer in India. You know that, right? The media called her Crane Bedi because she took on one of the most challenging tasks in Delhi to this day, which is if you are parked wrongly, she's going to tow your car away. Okay, so they called her Crane Bedi, right? Because of course she was the one who was sending planes. How daring was she? She was in charge when one of the prime minister's cars were towed because it was wrongly parked. Think about that. But she gained international attention when she was Director General of Tihar Jail, because she said the purpose of jail is not to punish, the purpose of jail is to reform, which worldwide is a very, very different way of thinking about prisons. US is the country with the highest rate of incarceration, prison people in the world. And the idea that prisons are a place for reform, not for punishment, is, I mean, that would be revolutionary in the US even today. Forget 15 years ago when Kiran Bedi tried to do that in India. For those things, she won the Roman Magsaysay Award. And a recent poll, and of course, I know that polls, you know, you should take them with a grain of salt and they are not to be fully trusted. But a recent poll ranked her the most admired women in India. So we met with her and we learned from her. Third, we met with Ashok Mittal, the Chancellor of Lovely Professional University. Those of you who don't know LPU or Ashok Mittal, he founded LPU and he manages what is now, you know, they claim it is India's largest private university. There are other claims. I'm not going to get into that. The idea is it is certainly one of India's largest private university, and it's the largest in a small town. Okay, Jalandhar, where the university is a very, very small town. He comes from a very humble background. His father had a sweet shop, and that's kind of the genesis of the Lovely Group. So he comes from a very humble background. Today, he's India's top edupreneurs. We also met with Harish Chandra Meena, former DGP of Rajasthan Police. Now, I think it goes without, I think this is non-debatable. Anywhere in India you go, if you ask people, do you think the Indian police force needs to be fit? The answer you would get is yes. Everyone I've ever asked has said yes to that question. Now, of course, that's not a scientific poll, but I would bet that this is the case. Okay, all new recruits, and Meena said all new recruits into the state police force should be selected only if they can run 10 kilometers in an hour. Right? Think about that. Here is the Director General of Police who wants the police force to be fit. The next test, 70 applicants, 70 people who wanted to join the police force fainted. One candidate died in Bikaner. The media lambasted him. Okay, so what did he do? He said, every one of you is saying 10 kilometers in 1 hour is not doable. I will show you that I can do it. So he ran it. He was 56 years at that time. So he was not a young person. Remember, these applicants who wanted to join the police force, they were 23, 24, 25 years old. He was double their age, probably more than their father's age. And he ran it himself and completed it. And in a rare praise, Hindustan Times called him probably the fittest police chief in the country. So we met him 1 year to talk about his attempts, challenges, and opportunities in transforming something as difficult to change as a police force. Now, we ran this course for 5 years, and we met a lot of leaders. We did not meet Amitabh Bachchan, but we were planning to meet him the next year because I'd been doing a lot of research on him. And of course, he is considered, the most trusted brand name in Indian advertising. And I'd been doing research on him for many years. And of course, he has many claims to fame. I won't get into that. Just suffice to say that the New York Times said the kind of devotions people have for Bachchan, American stars like Tom Cruise and Julia Roberts, they can only dream of that kind of adulation. They can never get it. Okay, so we were going to meet him we were planning to meet with him in 2015, but I moved and the course finished for that reason. But that was another person we wanted to meet. Then we met KPS Gill, former Director General of Police. His claim to fame, the only police chief in the world to have eradicated domestic terrorism. Okay, you look at any place in the world, there is no other place where domestic terrorism has been eradicated, okay, by the police without a political compromise. That is really, well, we won't get into that. They call him the Lion of Punjab for his daring, what he did, super cop, things like that, received India's 4th highest civilian honor. He did a bunch of other things too, but what we went to talk to him was, how did you eradicate terrorism in Punjab? Tell us about your experience there. That was the focus of our conversation. And he is a phenomenal speaker. So now I'm going to get into what lessons did we learn. But
So I had a question, but it was more about Kiran Bedi's thing, reform.
Tell us, ask us.
So like you said that, like Kiran Bedi ma'am said that India's jail need reforms and not strict punishment. So the person who have, am I audible? Because there is lot of background noise.
You are audible.
So
You are audible.
the person who does heinous crimes, so do we really need reform there? Because I think society needs reform more than the person who is jailed for such act. Like what happened in Hathras, like they are more deserving for the punishment rather than reform. So what's your take?
May I know your name, please?
Akriti Chauhan.
Akriti, there's a debate worldwide on what is the purpose of prisons. Okay, countries like India and America have decided that prisons are to punish. Okay, countries like Sweden have decided that prisons are to reform. At the root of this debate, and this is kind of where why Kiran Bedi got so much attention, right? She was in a system where, India doesn't have the reputation of Sweden or Denmark, which is that prisons should be places for reform. And here was Kiran Bedi saying, yes, these people committed a crime, but shouldn't we give them a chance to improve? Shouldn't we give them a chance to become better? What about all the people who are going to be released from prison tomorrow? And vast majority of people do get released from prison at some point, right? If we don't reform them when they are in prison, then they are going to go out and commit the crimes again. And you see the same thing in America. In India, we don't collect very good data on these things, but what we see in America is when people are released from prisons, they find it very difficult to rehabilitate back into society because they don't have any skills. society doesn't want to give them jobs, right? And so they find it difficult to reform. So I'm not going to get into the debate of whether everyone can be reformed, whether some people are beyond reforming, right? But Kiran Bedi's idea was, which, like I said, was way ahead of its time, is let's give people a second chance. Just because they commit one crime doesn't mean that forever their life is gone. Okay, so that's where she stepped in. So what lessons did we learn? Okay, that's kind of what you probably are most curious about. I'm going to make 3 soft claims. Okay, soft claims because I don't have the data to make hard claims on these things. Okay, but I don't have the data, to be honest. Nobody in India has the data to make hard claims on these things. And yet people make hard claims on these things all the time. I'm going to make 3 soft claims. First is, what I learned from meeting with these leaders is hard work trumps elite education or nepotism at any time. Okay, none of our leaders went to elite colleges. None of our leaders went to what we in India think is top colleges. None of our leaders came from families that set them up for success in the way they got to it. Okay. In fact, in many cases, they came from very humble backgrounds, but they worked hard. Now, in a recent New York Times article, not recent, a few years back, the New York Times noted that children choose what to be when they grow up. They often follow in their father's footsteps. Okay. Now, in the last about 20, 30 years, women have started working too, right? So they found that in some cases, kids also follow their mothers. And in India, we make a really big deal about elite education, right? You either get into the top colleges, right? IITs, IIMs, or your life is gone. Or, some people in India, including the media, loves to talk of nepotism. As the New York Times noted in this article, politics and films are the 2 areas where, you are most likely to get the benefit of nepotism. But what we saw among these leaders was that elite education or nepotism was always trumped by hard work. And I wish we had the data in India to measure that, so this soft claim could be a hard claim, but we don't. Most of the leaders we met had good communication skills. Okay. Now this is important, I think, because I've ran businesses in India. Okay. I've managed my own business in India. I come to India regularly. Even in the US, I find this in India. Most young people today don't have good communication skills. Okay. This is despite the fact that colleges and universities say that they want to emphasize communication skills, and yet they don't. So I started thinking, why do these people generally, not all of them, had good communication skills? And I realized that they had a story to tell. Okay, so 2 things came together to make them have good communication skill. First is they had experiences, story to share. Okay, plus they really believed in those experiences. And I find that missing with a lot of young people these days. So they had a story to tell, they believed in what they were saying, and together that led to them having good communication skills. The third thing, again, it's a soft claim, okay? The third thing I learned was spouse and family should be constructive or at least neutral, okay? Now, I could give you many examples, even from our little sample, but, if you ever wondered, like, they say before Amitabh Bachchan believed in himself, his mother believed in him, okay? Before anybody believed that Amitabh Bachchan could succeed, his mother believed in him. And then after when he, became older, when he came into the film industry, his wife, who was then not his wife, believed in him more than he believed in himself. And there's many interesting stories about that I'm happy to share. Ashok Mittal, the family believed that they can move from owning a sweet shop. I mean, every street corner in India has a sweet shop, right? I've been to Bhopal. How many sweet shops do you have in Bhopal? Thousands of sweet shops. The family believed that they could move from being a sweet shop owner to becoming one of India's largest edupreneur. Sheryl Sandberg, who's the CEO of Facebook, makes this point in her bestseller Lean In. The single most important career decision, she said, one makes is who their life partner is. I submit to you that it's not just the life partner, it's the family. At best, they should play a constructive role, and if not a constructive role, at least they should be neutral. The least is a partner or a family that is actually destructive, that takes you down rather than take you up. So 3 soft claims. Now I'm going to move to the main things I learned, not the soft claims, the main claims. First, all these leaders we met, from the beginning of their career, they brought positive attention to themselves. They did things that would bring them positive attention, even if it is small things. Okay, let me give you 2 examples. In Bedi's case, she was a young IPS officer at a protest rally in the late 1970s, I believe. And protesters, when they were getting out of hand, she charged at them with just a stick. You know, the police carry in India the stick, right? The small stick that officers carry. When they had in their hands swords. The impression that sent that to the brass, remember, she was India's first female IPS officer. And what was the impression? She is going to be weak. And when she charged at those protesters who came at her with a sword, it established that she is second to none in bravery. With Amitabh Bachchan, there's a famous story that when he was shooting for his first movie, Saath Hindustani, everyone in the unit slept in a big hall, and they each had their own bedding. They would fold it, they would spread their bedding and they would sleep. And Anwar Ali, who was one of his co-actors, and if you want, I can give you more story. He remembered, even after years, that Amitabh Bachchan's bedding used to be the most organized in those days. Now, it seems like a small thing, right? And some of you in Naga's talked about this, bestseller book, Make Your Bed. I remember one of the female students mentioned the book, Make Your Bed. That makes the same point. You are bringing positive attention to yourself from the beginning. And these leaders that we had did that. So one of the things I would encourage you to ask yourself as you kind of start your career is, what will bring me positive attention in my early days? When I pose this question to young people, many of them say hard work. That's the wrong answer. Here's why. Every one of the people, every young person, when they're interviewed for a job, say that they are going to work hard. There's no way for any of their bosses to know that they will. You need to think beyond just saying things like hard work, honesty, mundane things that everyone says. Ask yourself, what will bring you positive attention, even in the beginning of my career? And of course, later, in their careers, people like Vineet Nair became famous for this idea of employee first, customer second, right? Again, positive attention. One of the things we saw was every leader we met had achievement goals. Okay, and as you can see, we met leaders at different stages of their career, at various stages, right? At various stages of success. And I was impressed as to the achievement goals that they had set for themselves. And all of them, except one, because KPS Gill, by the time we met him, he was very sick. And I think 2 years after we met him, he passed away. So except him, every one of those leaders had achievement goals. Bedi, we met her in 2012-13. She was retired from IPS, but she was already actively planning for the next stage of her career. And all of you can figure out what that is by going to the web. Ashok Mittal is impressive because they, like I said, they went from being owning very small, simple business to being India's largest private university. But one of the things people don't realize is very, very ambitious in terms of setting achievement goals. And I can promise you this, I haven't talked to him about this, but you must have read a few days ago that the Indian government said now they're going to allow online education. And I promise to you, based on my interactions with him and what I know about him, that LPU and he is already probably angling to do something in the online education space. I have no doubts. Now, why is this important? I encourage you to talk to your parents. I encourage you to talk to your cousins. I encourage you to talk to your uncles and aunts. I encourage you to talk to your friends. Ask them, what are your goals for the next 5 years? I promise to you, not more than 10% of them are going to be able to tell you achievement goals. Okay, I'm not talking about goals like, I want to buy the next car. Not that. Achievement goals. Okay, and so it's very impressive to talk to these leaders and see that they had goals that they wanted to achieve. And I find that very, very impressive. Third, all of them realize that they serve as role models for others. Okay, all of them. Even though I'm not saying they are perfect, remember what I said in the beginning, right? I'm not saying they are perfect. And in, when you do more research on them, one of our leaders, he pretty much was got a lot of infamy for some mistakes he made, but in every case they served as role models for others. KPS Gill, one of the things he talked to us was about how when he became the Director General of Police, there were areas of Punjab where even the police force was not willing to go, where senior police officers had not gone in years. He talked about how there were areas in Punjab where if a police man was shot, police person was killed by terrorists, nobody would go because they were afraid of going. And one of the things he said he did that was highly symbolic, but what it did was it showed them who's the boss. He said, we are going to every one of those events. If a police officer is killed, I am going to go to that area, no matter how afflicted with terrorism it is. Okay. Now this is very important. Why? Think about, I don't know how many of you follow this, but when many American leaders go to visit Afghanistan or Iraq, where American soldiers are serving, many of those leaders go in the darkness of night. They go with media blackout so that nobody finds out. Now imagine what signal does it send to the soldiers? It says, if the boss is afraid, how are we secure? And KPS Gill knew that is a big problem when you're dealing with terrorists. Okay. Vineet Nair, he said the 360-degree feedback applies to everyone, including the CEO, which is pretty impressive if you think about it, right? I promise to you that if, I don't know, if there's 50 friends you have, maybe one of you will work in a company where the CEO will be included in the 360-degree feedback. But Vineet Nair said, if I want to have other people in my company agree to be part of 360-degree feedback, the CFO, the CEO, my juniors, the chief marketing officer, whoever, the division presidents, if I want them to be part of the 360-degree feedback, I have to be part of the 360-degree feedback. And as I gave you the example of DGP Meena, when the press and the citizenry resisted his efforts, which in India is not uncommon, right? The press and the citizenry they may say they want the police force to be fit. They may think they want the police force to be Dabang or Rowdy Rathore or whatever the latest craze is. But they pushed back when Meena tried to make them even somewhat fitter. So he ran the 10K himself and showed them that this is not difficult to do. These leaders realize something that most people do not. People hear what you say and they see what you do. What impression are they taking about what you are saying and doing? Many leaders say things and do things that you go, really? But the people that we met in their sphere in which they had been successful, they were role models. They realized that the power of what they say and the power of what they do is very impressive. Warren Buffett likes to say, if your words and actions were put on the front page of a newspaper by an intelligent reporter, would you be proud of what it shows? And I suggest to you, and I would convey to you, that each of these leaders we met, if you took these things they did, the 360-degree feedback, the going to the heavily infected terrorist areas, the running of the 10K, these people would be proud if the newspaper put it on the front page. The problem is Indian newspapers, remember what I said to you about American newspapers? Indian newspapers rarely do that. For them, the front page is for all the negative news, not for putting inspiring words and actions on the front page. And I think these leaders did a really good job with being role models. Fourth, let's talk about resilience. What is resilience? To continue to doing what you're doing despite setbacks and failures. I am so amazed that so many young people in India, in America, are so afraid to fail. One of the things I've learned in my life, and I learned from these leaders also, if you are not ready to fail, you have no right, you have no claim to success. You are really not prepared for success. Kiran Bedi was often sidelined in her career. Okay, now some people say, was it because of her personality, because she was really aggressive, or was it because of the fact that she was a woman? And in the IPS at that time, the Indian police force, they didn't know how to deal with a woman. I don't know which of those two it was. And I don't think she knows that either, to be honest. And yet she persisted. Every time they would sideline her, she would come back stronger. They sidelined her, she went and got a master's. They sidelined her, she went and got a doctorate. And what did that do? Now she was more educated, more qualified than her bosses. They would send her to a punishment posting like the Tihar jail, and she would make her name out of that punishment posting. They sent her to traffic police, first female police officer, let's put her into traffic. As you know, traffic is considered like, the punishment posting. Guess what? She became Crane Bedi. Not Kiran, Crane. Often sidelined, yet persisted. Mittal, Ashok Mittal, failed many things. For example, when Ashok Mittal and his team went to Bajaj to get their first scooter agency, they were made fun of. They were told, what do people who run sweet shops know about selling scooters? Same thing when they went to get the Maruti agency, they were told no. When LPU was first established, they established it in Chhattisgarh, and we know what happened, right? That was cancelled. Most of the universities that were registered as part of the Chhattisgarh University Act cancelled. Many people would have given up then, persisted, and of course, they became successful with that. Now, Bachchan's failures are legendary, right? I mean, I don't have to tell you. You can find a lot about them. 1980s, his decade of failures. 1990s, decade of trying for comeback, but ended up bankrupt. But his failures started early. His father was a good friend of Prithvi Raj Kapoor. Those of you who do not, the young people who do not know, Prithvi Raj Kapoor is kind of the father figure of the Indian film industry. Amitabh Bachchan's father was a good friend of Prithvi Raj Kapoor. And Amitabh Bachchan said, and his father asked Prithvi Raj Kapoor if he would give Amitabh Bachchan a chance in the movies. And Prithvi Raj Kapoor said, no, I don't think he's going to be able to succeed. His failure started when he was at a very young age. And yet he persisted and he persisted. And guess what? Today, if I ask you, who was the person who became police commissioner of Delhi when Kiran Bedi should have become the police commissioner, but they sidelined her and made him, you would not be able to answer. Frankly, I say 99% of people would not be able to answer. Why? Because that guy is forgotten. Kiran Bedi, we know her, we remember her. Amitabh Bachchan submitted his his pictures to a film contest. If I asked you who won, you would not know. And yet, we know one of the guys who did not win. In fact, his picture was rejected. But we know where he is today. If you are young, one of the things I'll encourage you to think about is, do you have a resume of failure? If you are not failing at things, I don't think you are ready to advance. Okay? In fact, if you are not failing, that means you are not trying hard enough. I'll give you an example. A few years back, somebody said to me, I tried to start a business, but I failed. So I'm never going to do it again. I said, wrong lesson. Henry Ford tried to start a company 3 times. He failed. 4th time, he succeeded. I can give you examples after examples, but one of the things we found in these leaders is a willingness to accept failure and yet continue to work hard on that path. 4th, this is somewhat over discussed, but I find this very interesting. All of these leaders in some way asked a simple question of themselves. What am I going to do for my organization? Or what am I going to do for this job? Okay. For most people, the job is a transactional relationship. I get paid, I do the bare minimum, right? And many people, when they think of their job, their whole focus is on what can the company do for me, okay? The leaders we met, one of the things I took away from them is they didn't waste their time thinking, what can the company do for me? What can others do for me? They said, what do I do for the company? What do I do for the organization? Let's take HCL. Years after Nair is gone, his emphasis on employee first will be remembered, right? Years after he's gone. Tihar jail is still there. The jail is just like it was before Bedi got there. But her effort at changing it got her international attention. Rajasthan police, the police force is still the same. Meena left. The 10-kilometer thing is gone. The policemen are back to being fat. But you know what? By trying to make the police force fit, that's his everlasting contribution. People forget it's very difficult to change organizations. Meaning it's very difficult to change the culture of a company. I'm not saying you should not try. I'm not saying it should not be done. I'm simply saying it's very difficult to change. If you are a good leader, you make constructive efforts to improve things, you move to the next level. What you do for the organization, you did your best, but guess what? It benefits you. Okay? If the organization decides to not change after you're gone, that's not on you. But because you did things for the organization, you were elevated to the next step as a leader. Now, Last time in Dr. Naga's talk, this issue came up too. And this is something I thought about a lot based on my interactions with these leaders, is where does self-interest fit in leadership? Probably the most controversial aspect of leadership, self-interest. I have come to believe that if you have no self-interest, like some of you said when Dr. Naga asked you about leadership last time, you said no self-interest. I submit to you that if you have no self-interest, you will likely not make it very far as a leader. You may become a saint, but you will likely not get very far as a leader. At the same time, if everything is about your self-interest, how does it benefit me? You will not get much respect as a leader. Okay, so what's the point here? I don't think leadership, in talking to these people, these 6 people, I realized leadership is not about taking out all the self-interest. You need that self-interest to have achievement goals. You need that self-interest to think about how are you going to get into a position where you can actually change things, where you can do, where you can make a difference. But then you have to temper that with how your advancement helps other people. If Vineet Nair had no self-interest, he would not be able to become a CEO, right? But if he never became the CEO, his employee first, customer second would not get the high platform that it actually got. You might say, Ashok Mittal, he led his family's expansion into higher education. It benefited him. Yes, of course. But look at all the benefits it created for the town of Jalandhar and Punjab. If you've seen the movie Udta Punjab, you know what reputation Punjab has in the rest of India today. But Mittal, by setting up LPU in Jalandhar, created employment where there were not private sector employment opportunities, white collar. I can give you other examples, but I think we are short on time, so I'll move on. The last thing I'm going to talk about these factors is money. Are these leaders rich? Remember I told you about all these leaders I heard when I was a student and when I became a professor, these American leaders. This issue of how rich are these leaders never really came up. I mean, Warren Buffett, everyone knows, but Wendy Kopp, Bob Woodward, are they rich? KPS Gill, Kiran Bedi, Vineet Nair, Harish Meena, how rich are they? I think we Indians have a really complicated relationship with money in general everywhere, but especially I see it in India. We like to believe that rich people are sad and immoral, but we want to be richer ourselves, right? So we have this strange relationship with money. I think the question to answer is, are these leaders working for money, right? Is money driving them, right? Is money driving them in a way that that's the driving force for them? Most leaders I've met in my life, and I've met hundreds so far, they are sort of middle class to rich. They're neither looking for money nor wearing it on their sleeves. Warren Buffett likes to make a joke that my secretary has a bigger car than me, right? And so the idea is, the secretary is into buying cars with her money. I don't really think about that. And I think this is important to understand because in India, the whole focus of the education system has moved to money, package. And I think when you talk to these leaders, the issue of money never even comes up. We talked to KPS Gill for, 3 hours. Nobody asked him how much money you make. We talked to Kiran Bedi for, 2, 3, 4 hours. Long time. It never comes up how much money she makes. I think it's a non-issue for them and for us, but I feel like when I talk to young people in India, and when I talk to parents, and when I talk to university administration, the whole focus is on package. And I would submit to you is that there are many people in India who are richer than KPS Gill, who are richer than Kiran Bedi, who are richer than Meena. But remember, we did not go to talk to them. We did not pick the leaders we are going to talk to based on how much money they had. Nobody cares. We picked them because they cared about what they were doing and they tried to do something positive with their chosen profession, regardless of whether they were rich or not. And I think that's an important thing to emphasize.
You said that issue of money never come up in the case of leaders, but according to me, the majority of leaders we are familiar with, they are the one who firstly have physical achievements, and then they hold the values and the values they ingrain. Then it comes in the foreplay. So priority is physical achievements. Then only people acknowledge them as a leader. If they don't hold any physical achievement, we don't see them as leaders. Then the values they ingrain comes into play.
When you say physical achievements, you mean like material achievements, like
exactly.
Money related, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think it's important to understand that we seem to be getting, especially in India, a very wrong picture from the media about leadership. True leaders, I'm not saying they're poor, and I'm not gonna, make some glamorous thing out of being poor, okay? I'm not poor. I don't want any of my students to be poor unless you choose it yourself, right? And so I'm not saying being poor is something to aspire for, okay? I'm not saying that. But I think in India, we have this complicated relationship with money where we say you should focus on material achievements, okay? And I am saying we went to Vineet Nair. I don't know, maybe he has less money than me, maybe he has more, I have no idea. But we went to him because he had this unique philosophy, employee first, customer second. I don't know what car he came in. I don't know how much money he has in the bank account. Who cares? I know a lot of business people in Delhi, right? Because that's my hometown. I would guess that many of them probably have more money than Kiran Bedi or DGP or Harish Chandra Meena or KPS Gill, who's passed away now. He's not alive anymore. I guess. I don't know for sure. And yet, I didn't take my students to meet most of those people. I took my students to meet people who had done something positive. So my point is, okay, another thing. These people did not wait to become rich before they started doing things in their profession. Okay, so did Kiran Bedi? I don't know, maybe she made a lot of money with her books. Although when I talk to authors in India, they tell me that you don't write books in India to make money unless you are Chetan Bhagat or Ashwin Sanghi or 2 or 3 of those. The rest don't make much money. But the point is, Kiran Bedi started doing those things to change before she had success as an author. Her success as an author came because she was doing those things. She had a story to tell. So I think in India, for whatever reason, and that is not the forum to discuss today, our focus has gotten inverted. We focused more on earning money and less on doing things. And I think that focus needs to shift more towards doing things and less towards making money. Not saying making money is bad. Don't get me wrong. You see the difference? The focus is on doing things. The money will follow. Believe me, the money will follow if you do things. But what I see in young people today is, how much am I going to make if I take this job? How much am I going to make if I take that job? Wrong way of thinking. I'm going to move to my next slide, which is about what should young adults do based on, kind of what I've learned. What are things that I want to share with you, okay? So my suggestions for young people. First is, it's amazing that young people want to go into leadership positions. They would love to be Vineet Nair. They would love to be Kiran Bedi, but they don't know much about them. And one of the reasons they don't know much about them is that in India, almost we have no culture now of reading non-fiction books. So I would suggest to you, read non-fiction books about effective leadership and successful leaders, especially focusing on Indian leaders and those in the field you want to go into, okay? The other day, the Wall Street Journal newspaper here talked about how, because of the coronavirus pandemic, sales of books have increased in America. I asked my publisher friends in India if that is true for India, and they all laughed. Okay, so I think that's a big difference, is we need to read. And I find that a big difference between US and India. The intelligentsia in US is vociferous readers. They read. In India, not so much. So one is read non-fiction books about effective leadership, successful leaders, to learn about these leaders. Second, whatever field you want to go into, identify successful role models, okay? Some of them in the same field where you want to make your mark, okay? Identify those role models and start thinking, how can you be more like them? At all stages of your career, including now when you're a student, have a board of advisors. What does a board of advisors mean? People you can turn to for suggestions and advice. This board of advisors should not include your parents or your in-laws or your any of those relations. There's a conflict of interest. They are always going to want you to do things that are the least risk-taking. My favorite is, if you read the autobiography of Harivansh Rai Bachchan, who's Amitabh Bachchan's father, it's very interesting in the chapter where he talks about Amitabh Bachchan going to Bombay to become a film hero after leaving his well-paying job. He says, I can't believe Amit is doing this stupidity. I am going to retire. Who will take care of the family now that he's given up his job? Think about that. That's a typical parent way of thinking, right? What will happen to the family if you do this? Parents tend to be highly risk averse. There's a conflict of interest. Have your board of advisors, and those board of advisors cannot be your friends either, like your college friends. They have to be more successful people than you, people that you can turn to for suggestions and advice. Have goals for the next 5 years. Those of you who want to get into leadership positions, those of you who want to have some sort of influence, start thinking, what are your goals for the next 5 years? How am I going to achieve them? I am so surprised when I talk to people in India, a lot of young people have dreams. I'm not talking about dreams, I'm talking about goals. And when you're making those goals, incorporate your family expectations to some extent into those goals, okay? You are part of your family. Understand what they expect of you, and to the extent possible, try to incorporate them into your plans. Well, as I said, focus on achievements, not the money. The money will come if you are achieving. Believe me, the money will come if you are achieving. Focus on the achievements, not on the money. I mentioned to you that I've managed businesses in India until very recently. And when I interview young people, I am amazed at how many of them don't have a doing orientation. They don't do, they have all these ideas. They talk about, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. I ask them, what have you done? And the answer is no. Okay, my favorite is, and I know this is probably not the forum to discuss this, but my favorite is a young MBA I interviewed for a job in India, and his hobby said traveling. So I said, and one of my hobbies is traveling too, and I travel a lot. And I said, so where have you traveled? And he said, I've never traveled anywhere. I said, but you said it's a hobby. He said, I want to travel at some point in the future. That's not what I'm talking about. Whatever you want to do, start thinking about how to do it. Implement it. You can try to minimize the chances of failure. That's acceptable, but you can never eliminate the chances of failure. You need to do. You don't become a leader unless you actually are doing things. Lastly, whatever stage of your career you are, network widely, including with people outside of your field, okay? Including people that you think you may not have anything to do with today. Network with them. I'm not saying form strong ties with everyone. Recognize that most of your ties are going to be weak. Only some are going to be strong. But you need to have both those strong ties with people and weak ties with a lot of people.